Today's episode is brought to you by Stream by AlphaSense, an expert interview transcript library that integrates AI-generated call summaries and NLP search technology so their clients can quickly pinpoint the most critical insights. Start your free trial at www.streamrg.co/PMC. That's STREAMRG.co/PMC. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not an offer or solicitation of an offer to buy or sell securities. SNN Network, SNN Inc., and the Planet MicroCap podcast and the representatives are not licensed brokers, broker-dealers, market makers, investment bankers, investment advisors, analysts, or underwriters. We do not recommend any companies discussed. We may buy and sell securities in any company mentioned and may profit in the event those securities rise in value. We recommend you consult with a professional investment advisor, broker, or legal counsel before purchasing or selling any securities referenced in this podcast. Welcome to the Planet MicroCap podcast. I'm your host, Robert Kraft, and thank you all so much for the support and for tuning in. Do me a quick favor. If you like what you hear at Planet MicroCap, please take 2 seconds and give us 5 stars on Spotify or Apple. This helps with the search engines so that more folks can also discover and engage with all things microcap stocks. Registration is now open for our next event, the Planet MicroCap Showcase, taking place in Las Vegas at the Horseshoe Hotel and Casino, formerly Bally's, on April 25 through 27, 2023. Expect 3 days of networking, company presentations, one-on-one meetings, in short, a lot of fun. If you follow our community and especially invest in microcap stocks, you're not going to want to miss this. Expect more announcements on speakers, presenting companies, the works. So to register and attend, please visit www.planetmicrocapshowcase.com. See you in Vegas. For today's show, I invited on Hermann Peterscheck, founder and portfolio manager at Hypernormal Capital Management. I met him recently when he participated in the Stock Pitch World Cup on Team Europe. Also a U.S. resident, he was on Team Europe because he was pitching a video game development company based in Europe. I started thinking about my own experience with video games, and it took me a minute because in my heyday, I was only playing FIFA and Madden on PlayStation 2. Safe to say the gaming industry has grown a lot since then. I've also interviewed a number of microcap companies that would describe themselves as a gaming company or gaming adjacent. And while it doesn't take a rocket scientist to recognize the explosion of video games, some of the newer entrants and business models haven't quite made a whole lot of sense to me. So I brought on Hermann, who has 20 plus years experience working and investing in the gaming industry, to cure me of my old man syndrome and hopefully help all of us better understand how to think about investing in this space. Thank you again for tuning in to the Planet MicroCap podcast, and please enjoy my conversation with Hermann Peterscheck. This episode is brought to you by Stream by AlphaSense. You can find them at streamrg.co/PMC. That's STREAMRG.co/PMC. Stream is an expert interview transcript library that is starting to become an integral part to investors' research process. They have a number of interviews on a wide variety of companies, including TMT, consumers, industrials, real estate, and more. Stream provides over 300 expert interviews per week, and 70% of their experts are found exclusively on Stream. Stream is unlike any other transcript libraries. Stream integrates AI-generated call summaries and NLP search technology so their clients can quickly pinpoint the most critical insights. Stream's community of experts and thought leaders partner with Stream to build their professional brands and expand their industry influence. Right now, there are approximately 8,500 plus call transcripts available. For more information, please visit www.streamrg.co/PMC. That's STREAMRG.co/PMC. Hermann, thank you for joining me today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's
Appreciate
great
being on here.
Absolutely. It's great to have you. Before we get started, I'd like to invite I met Hermann because he was part of Team Europe for the Stock Pitch World Cup. And it was just a fantastic pitch. That's not a recommendation of the company. It was just a great pitch. Check him out there. And, I wanted to talk more because the company he actually pitched on there was a company in the video game space. And I wanted to dive a bit deeper into the idea of gaming, because this as an industry or a sector or whatever, however you want to categorize it, feels very esoteric, in a good way, because there's lots of new business models and new ways in which folks are entering the space. But at the same time, it's now also, even for me, quite confusing. I've done a number of interviews with companies in the gaming industry now in my career, and then especially in the last 6 months. And it seems that each new company has a new business model and a new way in which they're attacking this. So let's start there. How should we think about the idea of the gaming industry just as a whole, and then we'll dig deeper?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I want to preface it by saying I worked in the gaming industry for about 20 years before I started life as a professional investor. Investing was my hobby, video games were my hobby, and so gaming was my job, investing was my hobby, and now I've kind of inverted that a little bit. And before that, of course, I played lots of games growing up, and I learned how to program because I wanted to make games. So gaming was kind of my life. And I never invested in game companies during that time, mostly because I think I understood the gaming industry reasonably well from working in it. And my conclusion at that time was it's not a great industry to invest in. And the reason why that is because it's like other forms of entertainment. It's incredibly hit driven. Nobody knows what the next hit is going to be. You can have a game that's monstrously successful for years, and then all of a sudden it falls off a cliff for apparently no reason. And so as an individual successful game is one of the best businesses in the world. But the gaming industry itself, I think, is not awesome because of these characteristics. So that before that turns into, wait, why are we even talking on this podcast now? I kind of changed my mind in the last few years, because I took to heart something I think Charlie Munger and Buffett, a bunch of other people who are great investors, have said it many times. They talk about circle of competence and how important it is to stay in it versus how wide it is. And so I realized gaming companies are the exact dead center of my circle of competence, whether I like it or not. And I think I was running away from them because I understood them so well. It almost created too much fear.
Well, why were you running? I mean, obviously you mentioned how it's like, it's just all about the hits, but why else? Was there other reasons why? Because you knew the industry so well?
Well, from a disposition perspective, I am someone who likes, I subscribe to the idea that you want to try to you want to invest in companies that you can predict over some period of time greater than a few years, 3, 5, 10 years, preferably. And the longer, the better. I really took that to heart. And the gaming industry is almost it's like as far away as you can get from that, normally speaking. So that was the other reason, is like structurally, it just was the exact opposite of how I thought good investing. Like good investing is you buy Coca-Cola and then you go to sleep for 100 years, like that was sort of my disposition, and you avoid anything unpredictable, And so, so for the longest time, that's kind of how I behaved. And I've been rethinking that, because that competes with the circle of competence problem. And so I'll give you an example. Like, let's say you invest in something like Procter and Gamble, right? So if you're like me and you're moderately ignorant about consumer products industry, like I've never worked at a consumer products company, I've never been the CEO of a company like Procter and Gamble. So I have no idea how random things affect their long-term business outlook. But I'm a user of their products, so I can say, well, I'm going to be, brushing my teeth and using toilet paper forever, so it's a safe bet. And it looks that way, but maybe if I understood the business in incredible detail, it wouldn't look quite so safe anymore. I don't know for sure. And so I think with gaming, that's kind of what happened to me, is I understood it so well, it scared me off. And so I started rethinking it much more deeply. And I think, so this is a very long way to not answer your question, but now I'm going to get to the answer of your question. I think what is really important to understand is that gaming companies occupy, it has a lot to do with the philosophy of why the company exists. So there's some gaming companies, and they're basically marketing businesses. So what they do is they look at the landscape and they say, oh, first person shooters are hot, so we're going to make first person shooters. And then what we're going to do, and mobile games are hot, so we're going to make a first person shooter on a mobile platform. And then we're going to spend tons of money marketing it, get to the top of the Google and App Store, try to get it in front of as many players as possible, sell lots and lots of copies if it's a box product. And then, 2 months from now, no one will buy it ever again, right? And then next, and we'll do that to like 20, 30 games, 18 of them will fail, 2 of them will succeed, and we'll just rinse and repeat that. And then once in a while, they find something that really works well, and then they can kind of turn it into a franchise maybe, and release a new version every year or two, and keep increasing the production value and so on. So that's one kind of gaming company. Another kind of gaming company are the ones that sort of like, they're sort of publishers. And so they try to scour the world looking for the next Minecraft or something. And they try to get it early and then release that. And that's another numbers kind of game, also very unpredictable. And there's a few others like that. But the one that I like there's every once in a while there's a gaming company, and what they do is they think about themselves as an audience company. So they kind of go, you mentioned 11-bit, which I am a shareholder of, right? And so 11-bit's a strange looking game company compared to these other ones, because these guys sort of look at the world and they go, there's all these war games out there, and we want to tell a story of people who are the survivors of a war. So they made this game, This War of Mine, that's about surviving a war. You're a civilian and you're like bartering for stuff and trying to keep your people alive and stuff. So it's a very dark, gritty game. And so they're trying to find stuff that's like deep and meaningful. And then the other thing they're trying to do is they're like, we want our players to play these games for like 10 years, the same game, and we'll add content to it with digital downloads, or if it's a service, they'll keep adding services to it. And they really see each game as like this incredibly long-term investment. And every product they take with that level of seriousness. And to me, that's a different orientation, because it results in, what happens is you tend to craft things that you make a relationship with the audience that's much deeper. Players don't feel like they're being sort of like treated as a commodity. And so they get this relationship with the company, and then that relationship makes them get other fans, and then the sort of fan base grows a little bit, and it grows a little bit more and a little bit more, and it widens, and then it deepens as those fans play one type of game like that. Maybe they play another game that's kind of like that. And so that to me is a much more, if you can execute it well, it's a more predictable and longer term business model. But it's not common.
For sure. So like one of the main reasons I want to bring you on here, because like as you kind of alluded to, gaming has gone beyond just publishers, right? That's how we traditionally really thought of, at least for me, really thought about the gaming industry. Now, with sports betting becoming more and more legal in more states in the US, and also now computer games really taking off and building out even bigger global audiences. I've been doing a number of interviews with companies that are on kind of that connector side, right, where they have relationships with global brands, and they're saying that they're bringing these global brands into the gaming and esports communities, or stuff like that, or they have technology to connect gamers to creators. There's all these kind of ancillary things that are different than just like your normal picks and shovels. For like, let's say a mining industry, you have your picks and shovels businesses. It's a little bit different, because and for me, when I'm trying to understand these businesses a little bit better, I'm trying to do my best to have that BS meter of like, what are you really telling me here? Like, is that your moat? Is that you have these relationships with these brands better than someone else? But, if these brands are so strong, why aren't they making their own relationships themselves? So it's kind of, I find myself sometimes getting even more confused even after the conversation, where I'm like, what is this business? Like, what is happening here? So when you're looking at some of these businesses, which I'm sure you have, how do you think about it?
That's a great question. And I think that kind of goes to the heart of it. And I can tell you how I think about it. That doesn't mean that I'm right and it does, or that it's exclusively right, or that those are going to be the most successful companies. But in terms of what I find predictable, the way I look at this is I really pay a lot of attention. And it's funny because normally you read, the 10K and the financials first, and I think that's important. But I actually really like to read the company's annual report, like what would normally be considered their marketing material to investors. And what I look for is if the company is talking about their customers as sort of like a commodity that they're trying to extract money from, I'm almost always out immediately, because that to me shows if you do that, it means that inside your company, you're not prioritizing a value and honest relationship with your players. And I think if you do that, you can be very successful. But the game you're playing is, and this is, I don't know if this is as true in sports gaming, gambling or whatever. I'm guessing it is, but the game you're playing is very simple. You're going to make a product, and let's say it costs like $1 million or something to make it. And then you're going to market it, right? And you want to make back, 1.2 million for every million you spend or whatever, right? So the game is, can you spend enough in advertising to attract enough people to spend enough money to overcome the cost? And if you can, then you just crank that and try to multiply it bigger and bigger, right? And because that's a hot industry, right? What happens is it attracts competitors, and that drives the price of marketing up. And so I think what's happening to a lot of these companies is as more people enter the space, more and more of them compete, it drives the cost of marketing up, and that drives the margins down. And if you don't have any loyalty with your players, with your customers, if you haven't built any loyalty to them, they'll just go from one thing to the next. They don't care. And so that's where I think games become very unpredictable. So that is, I think, a key. So when you're reading through, so for example, if you look at like Games Workshop, who make Warhammer, and I own shares in Games Workshop as well, right? If you read their annual report, right, it's written by the CEO Kevin Roundtree, who was the COO, and he turned the business around in terms of its operations. I think the mission statement of the company is something like, to make the best fantasy figurines in the world profitably forever. And it's in like their annual report. And he's like, all we want to do is make this incredible game for these diehard fans for eternity at a profit. That's our business model. We're not trying to squeeze ARPU. We're not trying to chase MOBAs or MMOs or whatever else. We're just focusing on that connection with the audience. And that's kind of what I'm looking for. And it's rare.
So, so you don't even look at some of these like marketing, these companies that don't really make the games, but are in the gaming industry, kind of on the outskirts of it. Because like my biggest gripe, and this is because I'm not a gamer, and I played a little bit when I was a kid, but it's not like there was like a lot of marketing while you're playing the game. Maybe there's some subtle things that you don't realize, but that's usually while in the making of the game itself, right? Like if it's, if they're making Toyota probably wouldn't be in Grand Theft Auto, but just, you catch my drift. Like, Lamborghini's probably talking to Grand Theft Auto, like, hey, put our latest line, and there's probably a deal. But that's not something that's a little deeper. What I'm talking about is like, once the game is made and now there's all this, global brand connecting, advertising. For you as a gamer, I'm assuming you still play a little bit. How does that experience really look when it's a game made by a company and they got certain ads in there? How does it affect gameplay? Like, is there a business here? Or is this something that most of the gaming community is like, all right, whatever, like we don't even really pay attention to this?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there absolutely is a business there. So a great example is like if you look at esports, and when I was working at Riot Games before I did this, we were really heavily into esports, and sponsorship was a big question. And we addressed it very much from this perspective of like, well, what feels authentic to the watcher? So like, if you're a League of Legends fan and you're watching the finals, and and there's a Coca-Cola ad there, is that okay? And my opinion is it is okay, because and I'm not saying it's okay because of some objective moral rationality or whatever, but like if I watch a football game or a hockey game and I see a Coca-Cola sign, it doesn't take me out of it. In fact, if you play like EA Sports games or something, real ads in the game make it feel more authentic because those are the ads you see in the real world. So that's fine. But it's tricky, because like if you go overboard, it can right away feel very alienating, or you start to feel very suspicious about, wait, why is that, is that sponsorship placement overkill? Like, would you be okay if you watched, like the stadium naming is a great example. Like some people, I used to live in Denver, and when they renamed Mile High Stadium and Vesco Field at Mile High, it pissed a lot of people off because they were like, no, that's Mile High Stadium. Some company shouldn't be able to just take our name, right? So you got to be careful, right? If you rename the Green Bay Packers the Green Bay Bank of Americas, I think you'd have a problem, right? So, but the way that the way you do this is the organization that's making these decisions has to have a very good connection with the fans and with the product, so they can make these kind of nuanced, intuitive type decisions. A great example, by the way, you can check this out. When NFTs became popular, a bunch of game companies were like, hey, we're going to make NFTs of this. They got a lot of backlash from the gaming community because the gaming community was like, you're trying to make a quick buck off this craze. F you. And so a lot of them kind of undid it really quickly because they realized that, their fans didn't like that. So that's an example of where you have to be careful. And that's, again, why I think I try to look for game companies that have this orientation. Now, you did mention briefly, like, the size of the org. So you mentioned Grand Theft Auto, which is Take-Two. And I think Take-Two is a very well-run game company. Like, the CEO is pretty awesome, right? And they're doing great stuff.
Shareholder?
I'm not a shareholder of Take-Two.
Thank you, sir.
And the challenge with some of those, with the bigger companies is, and this is part 2 of investing in game companies that I think is hard, is it's very hard for those companies to get like 10, 20, 30 times bigger, right? So if you're a $200 million video game company, if you have a breakout hit, so if you just make good games, make it profitably, you can have a pretty good business, but you have the chance of doing something that does insanely well. And then you can become a $2 billion company and you can stay there. But if you're like a 20 or a $40 billion company, like, it's hard for Activision to get 10 times bigger. Now, it was possible when Bobby Kotick first sort of took it over. And that's, he multiplied it massively through very intelligent acquisitions, I think. But so it's hard for these big companies to get a lot bigger. So I was on Twitter. I was talking about Grand Theft Auto 6 a little bit because, a bunch of stuff leaked and they're probably going to. So Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to come out. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to play it. It's probably going to be a great game. But if it does as well as Grand Theft Auto 5, it's not going to make Take-Two much bigger, right? It's just going to be, instead of making money here, they're now going to make it there. It's very hard for Grand Theft Auto 6 to be 10 times bigger than Grand Theft Auto 5, I think.
So is that why some of these gaming companies are more open to talking with more advertisers? Because, right, I mean, it's one thing to build a monster, but now you got to start thinking about other ways in which to make money, other different revenue streams. I mean, that's why they were open to trying out NFTs, but you brought up an interesting point about that delicate balance between understanding your fan base and then also working with advertisers, which makes it interesting when you think about some of those advertising connector business models, because it's like, okay, you can't just flood, you can't just work with any global brand because not any global brand will work with every game, because most of the gaming community has either, and their own ethos, but it's probably all very derivative of each other, if I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my main question there is when you're starting to really think about, and again, I apologize if I'm talking too much about the advertiser side of things, but in the microcap space, you're not dealing with a lot of game makers, so to speak.
Yeah.
You're mostly dealing with the folks that are kind of servicing on the the outskirts, again, not making the games themselves, but helping maybe enhance some of those business models. So that's why I'm bringing it up a little bit more than maybe just say talking specifically about Activision. There's enough people talking about the game makers themselves.
Yeah. So you're talking about like the companies that are a service to connect advertisers to the games.
Yes.
That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I saw that when it was in its inception. It started to grow when the massively multiplayer online games were becoming popular because, it was just, the advertising industry is constantly, they're very intelligent people. And what they do is, my understanding is they basically go, where are people's eyeballs? And let's put something in front of their eyeballs that has some logo on it. And then we can, that's a toll bridge for us. And video games is a great one because like, not only do you have this captive audience, I mean, when you're playing a game, you're not passively looking at the screen. Mostly you're looking very closely. And the person who's looking was a young, usually male person with disposable income. So it was like a dream come true for advertisers. And you have perfect information. I can tell you exactly who it was, how long they looked, where they looked, what they were doing, how long they did it. So that was very attractive. The problem I have is like, it's not very hard to build those connections. And so I would struggle to understand why a company would have any kind of a competitive advantage over another one.
I guess the ones maybe that might, and just thinking out loud here, would be the ones maybe that are building out their own content creators themselves. Like, let's say, you have those folks that are very popular on Twitch or TikTok that are active gamers, and they have a bunch, they have them, I don't know, some sort of contracts with them where, hey, you want to reach, this hundreds of millions of potential eyeballs because we work with these 10 content creators that are all part of our holding company or whatever, here's some of the deals that you can do. I guess that's seemingly where there can be some, and honestly, actually, that's what I've seen in a few of these names.
Yeah, there's a lot of, it's a very hot business, I think, talent management of people like streamers and things like that. And it seems, I haven't looked at it in great detail. From what I see, it's incredibly fragmented. And my guess is like the big companies, like who is a big, like Image or somebody like that, like the big talent, they're just going to like vacuum up the small ones that win and, and try to suck that up. But interestingly, there's a guy, he runs a small game publisher in the UK called No More Robots, and that's the company name. His name's, I think, Mike Rose, and he has talks on marketing. And I think in one of his talks he says, if you can get a influencer to play your game, that used to be like a big thing to get your game out there, and that sort of eroded very quickly. Like, it doesn't have the same impact it used to have, which I thought was interesting. So zooming back a little bit, like what I think is if you're going to look at these companies like that are either intermediaries for ad sales or talent representatives or things like that, you want to really, really understand like who is the talent they're representing and what is the experience of the game developers using that in order to try to increase their business, because it's a very hit or miss thing. And I also think like I'm hesitant to say it because I don't want to denigrate anybody, but I think the speed that the gaming industry has grown, especially in esports and especially now with Web3 and NFTs and everything, has attracted a lot of people who are of questionable character. And so you have to be really careful now, I think.
100%. I couldn't agree with those sentiments more. But actually,
there's a lot of good salespeople, and I'm not a good salesperson, and I have a really hard time sussing out when I don't know how good my bullshit detector is. When I'm talking to somebody who's really, really good at bullshitting, they're probably better at bullshitting than I am detecting it. And so I try to look really from the bottom up, So like if I was looking at this company, to be like, okay, which streamers does this company represent, or which games did this company sell ads to? Because I know those games, and I can then go, try to contact the people who made them and talk to them about it or something. Like I wouldn't trust anything that the person told me.
And for everybody listening that's looking to invest in this space, I highly would recommend utilizing what Hermann just said. Like, do your channel checks if you can, or at a minimum, contact Hermann, and he might miss them. But another topic I actually wanted to speak with you today was on esports. You kind of brought it up in your answer in that last bit there, and because another type of gaming company that I've interviewed now in the last year and change have been these companies that are working with various franchises on their esports franchise, and it just seems like an endless bottomless pit, which I know is probably what's attractive about this, but it's like, all right, you're going to go to every sports franchise and say, hey, your League of Legends team, oh, this new game is now hot. Okay, your now new game is hot team. And like just trying to make sense of like, how do you value these franchises? Because I get it. I'm sure there's definitely going to be people watching tournaments and all that. Like ESPN has made a big deal about this. So I'm not trying to be like, poo-pooing any of this or anything, but just from an investment perspective, trying to value what these franchises are really worth, and you're basing it almost like a commodity of when how hot this game is or not, or whether it's now an old game or whatever. How should folks think about esports and maybe these companies that are kind of trying to buy up esports franchises or help launch them and all that jazz?
Yeah.
Big topic. I'm sorry.
No, it's a great question. So again, like I have a very naive approach, I guess, in that, and it's the same whether it's games or esports. Like I always try to think back to like, well, why does somebody watch League of Legends or Overwatch, or or why do they watch Grand Theft Auto streamed on Twitch, or why do they watch chess games or Dungeons and Dragons campaigns? Like people watch all kinds of stuff. And sports is one of them, and for the longest time, you basically had football, hockey, golf, and so on. And then I think I was lucky in that I was at Riot when League of Legends sort of grew as an esport. And I think there was esports quite a long time before League of Legends. I mean, people used to watch like, there were arcade world championships where you'd watch somebody play Donkey Kong for 4 hours or whatever. And there were like, Street Fighter championships that were very popular, but it was very niche. I think League of Legends was the first thing where it was like, in major sports stadiums. And I think the thing that people get wrong is, and this is, I think to me, it's a very important thing to understand the structure, is like, when you think about normal sports, you don't think about like, you don't think of like, a sports fan just because somebody watches basketball doesn't mean they like baseball, right? You may like one game and hate the other. You may like two and dislike the rest, right? So when we think about sports, we don't, and because we have this esports bucket, we kind of say like there's baseball, football, basketball, and then there's all these video games. And that's not how it is at all. Video games are just like on the sports side. There's people who watch League of Legends and they don't watch anything else. There's people who watch Overwatch, they don't watch anything else. They watch Fortnite, they don't watch anything else. Okay. And so as a result of that, like the vertical matters a great deal, right? And what you'll see when you see this, because people can say, oh, look how many millions of people watch the finals of League of Legends or Fortnite or whatever. It's a great way to sort of market a business and say, I can take this other game and turn it into that, but you can't. You usually can't. It's sort of like, remember the XFL, right? So you can say, oh, people love football, but the NFL only runs during the season. So we're going to start this other football league. And if we can get, 20% of the viewers, we'll have a big success. But you can't even get 2% of the viewers because NFL fans don't want to watch the XFL. They don't care. They already have their game. They'd rather watch, nothing almost, or reruns or something, so it's the same kind of thing. Like to develop a sport is quite difficult. Like how many sports have been successfully created in the last 100 years? Maybe a dozen. So, some guy in Florida was trying to, I can't remember who it was. He was trying to make highlight like a mainstream sport, and he spent tons of money on it. Is it a mainstream sport? No, it's not. So it's remarkably difficult. And I think it's not an accident that the top esports, which maybe it's like Free Fire, Overwatch, League of Legends, Fortnite. I mean, they're largely owned by the companies that own the sport, right? Which is kind of interesting.
So in layman's terms, we should give some weight to when there are these, a Dallas Cowboys Fortnite team or like a New York Yankees, Overwatch team, like these because these are games that truly have that huge by the way, I apologize to any gamer that's watching this. You're speaking to a complete noob. I tried playing computer games once when I was in middle school, and all my friends, like I couldn't do it. But I'm still fascinated by the industry. That's why I'm talking to Herman today. So I just want to make sure that's clear. But getting back to the idea, like, so when you see some of these franchises, mainstream sports franchises have their, esports subsidiary, that's, that's something to really take into consideration and look at, because there actually are these leagues and generating eyeballs. And it is actually very difficult to really start up a new game league. But that's also something to think about too, when you have a company that's saying that they can do that. So
yeah, I think where I think it is an interesting opportunity, and there have been entrepreneurial people who started early and they've been very successful at it, is like sort of like the football club model, where like if a game becomes really popular, like say Fortnite or whatever, you basically you create your pro Fortnite team and you go compete in that space, and you're competing both for winning tournaments, but also using that to drive sort of fan base. And so let's say you and I start a esports franchise, and we're gonna pick these 4 games, and we're gonna build teams to compete in those 4 games, and then we're gonna build a franchise around that brand, right? I mean, I think that is a very lucrative opportunity. I mean, like I think, and then there's definitely cases of it. Like I'll go back to like the Green Bay Packers or whatever, right? But like, the Green Bay Packers have an incredibly strong brand, completely independent from the NFL in some ways, now, of course, without professional football, that wouldn't exist. But, the New York Yankees have a brand that is in some ways independent from baseball, right? It's global and so on. And, Manchester United or something like that. So I think that is another place that's really interesting. And there are people who have built successful businesses around that. And from the perspective of predictability, I think it's probably more predictable. Like, if you could own the Green Bay Packers, for example, as a business, it's very hard for me to believe that in 50 years there will be no Green Bay Packers. I think they'll be around. I think their stadium will be full. Their season tickets will sell out. There'll be people wearing jerseys all over the place. So that's probably a very good business. So I think that's an interesting area to look for sure.
Absolutely. So I want to now transition to talking a little bit about what's worked in gaming in 2022, what didn't work. And let's start there, and then we'll talk about, looking ahead as well. So in your opinion, what's worked, what didn't work in 2022 in the gaming industry?
Well, 2022 was a tough year because, COVID, COVID really supercharged gaming, both in terms of speculative investment, so multiples, but also in terms of actually people buying and playing games. Because if you're stuck at home, you play a lot of games. So, we saw, along with the everything bubble, gaming was probably, I think, I don't know if I haven't done a statistical regression or anything, but my guess would be that gaming companies on average were probably more bubbly than the average company. And now they've reverted to some degree, at least many of them have. So I think 2023 is looking quite a bit better. In terms of what works, like you're talking about like themes or that kind of thing. So I believe that there was a bunch of companies that got distracted by like the crypto NFT stuff. Um, and now there's a great deal of money. It's mostly from the venture capital community that's going into like pay to earn, Web3, metaverse. There's a lot of money pouring into that. It confuses me, because so I can take those one by one if you want. So like let's take pay to earn.
Please.
Okay, so
yeah, let's do it.
So there's this idea, right? That like let's say you play a game like World of Warcraft and you spend, 6 months grinding for this, really rare sword or something. And you get the sword. And then the question is, do you own the sword? Well, you don't own the sword. Blizzard owns the sword. And so if Blizzard wants to take the sword from you, they can. If they turn off the game, the sword disappears and it's gone forever. And so that's created, through blockchain, this desire that this idea that like you as the player should own the sword, right? Not Blizzard. And that opens up a bunch of possibilities. The first possibility is you can trade the sword to other people for real money. And you can use the sword in other games or something. Neither of those things make any sense to me. The first one doesn't make sense to me because that's been around forever. Like when I first started playing like MMOs back in the 90s, like there was a game called Ultima Online that was like one of the first major successfully MMOs. And like there's a whole story of like this company in Mexico. I think they were called Black Ice or something. And they hired a bunch of people, and all those people did is farm gold, which was the currency of that game, and sell it on eBay. And Origin, which was owned by Electronic Arts, the company that made the game, they tried really hard to crack down on that because it was kind of ruining the economy of the game. And so you'd go on eBay and there were tons of Ultima Online items for sale all the time. So people were selling these fantasy items. There's a guy named Julian Dibble. He wrote a book called Play Money, where he was trying to earn a living selling virtual items. This is 1998. So none of this is new. This has been around. Every time there's an MMO, there's a market for it. And then the companies try to crush it, not because they hate the market necessarily, although that might be why. It's because it ruins the game. And so, like, very famously, Diablo 3 released with a real money auction house. And the reason why they did that is because Diablo 2 had this eBay, black economy problem. So people were getting scammed, all kinds of stuff. So Blizzard was like, cool, we'll own the auction house so players don't get scammed. I was very excited about it. They released it. I played Diablo 3, and just like almost everybody else who played it, hated the auction house. And eventually Blizzard turned it off because it wrecked the game. So,
But dude, this was the birth of crypto. This is where the idea of crypto came from, man.
Well, so yeah, I mean, crypto aside, like I think the thing that's missing is like, you have to think about the psychological state and of what the experiences you have. So let me give you an absurd example to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. Let's say you go to a great restaurant, okay, and the dinner is incredible, okay, and you say, hey, get the chef out here because this was amazing. The chef comes out and you're like, chef, this was the best meal I've ever had. Thank you. And you walk out of the restaurant. Are they going to be happy? No, because you didn't pay, right? So they're going to be really pissed off about it. Now, let's say you go to like your mother's house and she cooks this meal that you had when you were growing up and you're like, Mom, that was the best meal ever. Here's $30. Is she going to think that's a compliment, or is she going to be insulted? She'll be insulted, right? Mostly, and now if you imagine that if you extract that, if you extend that to dating, you go out on a date and you give your date money for a good time. They're not going to take that as a positive transaction, right? They're going to be very insulted because they're like, I'm not a prostitute. What are you doing? So not everything should be a financial transaction. And I think when you turn gaming into a financial transaction, you kind of, if you're just having fun, you're kind of wrecking it if you're not making the most money you can. So now your brain is like, am I supposed to be having fun, or am I supposed to be making as much money as possible? And I think that's a tricky area to cross. And I think, maybe someone will crack it and maybe they won't. But I think it's very hard to have, it's a very binary kind of thing. Like you're either going out to eat and you're paying for food, or or somebody's cooking for you and you're going to give them a compliment. But you can't. It's going halfway is very difficult. So I think a lot about that. And then the interpolarity of items is a really weird thing. Like if anybody's played a game like Call of Duty, it like how do you take the World of Warcraft sword into Call of Duty? It doesn't make I can't make sense of it. The one place where it does seem to work is like Roblox, where you have this very, very broad kind of ecosystem where there's a creator culture behind it that's making games on the same platform. And there's a lot of consistency with the identity. Like you're this little Roblox and you can appear similarly. And they're bringing items between one place and another probably makes a lot of sense. And, there's things like that. But I think it's one of those things where it sounds good on paper, but when you actually go to think about it from the experience of the user, I fail to see the problem it solves. And that doesn't mean it doesn't solve a problem. I just may not have the imagination, but I don't buy the pitch. If you have a second, like I want to give one other analog to this.
Please keep going. I'm loving each one.
There's a guy, he wrote the book called The Lean Startup. I think his name's Eric Reyes, which is a great book. I think his first product was something called IMVU, which was like one of the first 3D chat computer programs. And he tells a story, and I think I'm getting it right, where like his thing was during this time, there were all these PC chat programs, like ICQ and AOL Messenger and all these kinds of things. And he was like, this is a pain in the ass because you have these 50 messenger programs and you have to go to all these different messenger programs and it's confusing. So he's like, I'm going to invent something that consolidates all the messengers into one program, one messenger program to rule them all. And you just have that and it manages everything for you and it's going to be awesome. And that was his thesis. And then, he spent a bunch of time building stuff, spent a bunch of money building it. And then he started testing it and he didn't know he was using it. And so he was trying to figure out, well, who's downloading this thing? And he saw that it was like teenage girls really downloaded it a lot, which he thought was weird. And, so he invited some of the users to talk to him, which probably felt a little strange, but he wanted to get the heart of this. And he was like, I'm trying to understand what's going on because you have all these chat programs and don't you want to consolidate them all into one? And they were like, no. And he was like, what? Why would you want to have all these chat programs? And they're like, well, because I use this one to talk to my friends. I use this one to talk to my parents. I use this one to talk to, and he was just like, oh shit, this was the core of that book. He was like, I made an assumption that was fundamentally wrong. And so I think a lot of this pay to earn stuff is making an assumption that's kind of like that. They're like, what's better than playing games? Getting paid to play games. No, that's not better than playing games, actually. I challenge that assumption. What's better than having stuff in a game, owning it in your real life and trading it with your friends and bringing it to other games? I don't think that's better. That might be worse.
Interesting.
So that's kind of where my head goes.
I mean, how is the broader both investing community and video game community thinking about those constructs basically? Because you're right, like that's been, especially now that you can make money as a gamer, it's so simple to think like, oh, duh, why don't you want to make money playing games? Like, people playing football, they're playing a game, they're having a great time. Like, same thing as a gamer, but like it for some reason, at least for you, it seems like it's not translating. But how is the broader industry thinking about it? Does that have legs, or is it? I don't know. It's I've never really thought about it because I just don't know the community as well as you do. I mean, I was one of those that thought like, why? Yeah, getting paid to play games like sounds great.
Something weird happens to us when we're wearing our user hat versus we're wearing our work hat versus we're wearing our investment hat, right? So it's important to understand the perspective that you have if you put on your investor hat and you start looking around at like play to earn or, NFTs, owning things, what you see is there's a lot of money going around, right? There's a lot of money being invested. There's a lot of businesses being spun up. There's a lot of really intelligent sounding articles you can read or podcasts you can see. But and when you're looking at that stuff, you're looking at it from the perspective of an investor. And the investor's perspective is, I want to put money, I want to put X dollars in, and I want to get like 10X dollars out as quickly as I can. And you see people doing that, and that makes you think this must be a good business, right? Because look, these guys have jets and stuff. And they're, naming stadiums or whatever. And I think this is incredibly dangerous. So I think what you have to do is you have to keep on your user hat while you look at the investment thing, right? So, I
mean, is it burnout? Is that really what like is some of these folks that have been playing, the play to earn, I mean, is there just like a general, like, I think about it also when it comes to like YouTubers, that used to, vlogging used to be a huge thing. It's still popular, but like when these people were making a ton of money just literally vlogging about their everyday lives. And I always thought to myself, like, that is so not sustainable. Where you're going to do this for the rest of your life and that's it? Like, because most of them aren't thinking beyond, just trying to make money vlogging on a daily basis. I sometimes think about that as a gamer itself. It's like, okay, I'm going to do my Twitch stream every single day. You're going to get burnt out as a content creator.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I don't think, I don't know, because I haven't dug into it enough. So I'm speaking a little bit from ignorance, and it'd be great if somebody listening could point me at stuff.
Yeah, please.
But I have not seen a play to earn Web3 game that did incredibly well from the perspective of it has millions of users and makes tons of money. From what I see, they've done very well at raising capital on that promise. And, stuff like NFTs does really well because I bought it for $10. It's hot potato. I sell it to you for 15. You sell it for 20. And at some point, the music stops and that person is left with a $2 potato. I've seen that. But I haven't seen the actual behavioral transformations or the value that it creates. A great example of, and that's what I mean by keeping your user hat on. By keeping your user hat on, I mean, look at what behaviors are changing and at what scale they're changing. So when I see NFTs, Web3, pay to earn, the behavior I see changing is the behavior of investors, of publishers, and some developers. I do not see massive behavior change of players. Okay. Crypto was very, very similar. Like I think I had some Bitcoin like way back when, and I lost it probably, and that's okay. Not a lot, because I thought Bitcoin was really cool. When it was first started, I was like, this is a very interesting idea. And, this is before Mt. Gox and all that stuff. And I had friends that were talking about it, and I'm kind of a nerd. So I downloaded, stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Like the transaction history is on the thing. This is very cool. And then I kind of ignored it for a long time. And then it got really hot, especially after the pandemic. And it got tied to all this crazy stuff. Like it's the energy of the universe and it's going to, keep us alive when governments fail. And I'm like, Jesus, what are these people talking about? And so what I saw was a lot of people getting rich from hype. But my own personal life did not benefit or was detracted because I didn't I looked at it like, so if I have Bitcoin on my phone, what can I do that I can't do now? And the answer is absolutely nothing. So it has no use to me whatsoever. The only use it has is if you believe that it's a good store of value if there is a big collapse or inflation continues forever. That kind of makes sense to me. I don't think that's going to happen, so it doesn't have any value. But these people that were like, look, I can instantly buy stuff. I'm like, I can do that with a credit card. Like right now. I mean, it's okay, the transaction gets processed tonight. I don't give a shit about that. I can buy it right now. So there's no change in behavior. But if you look at like, say, Chat GPT, okay, I'm seeing big behavioral shift very, very rapidly. Like people are starting to use it to do all kinds of crazy stuff, the advanced AI stuff. So when I'm trying to evaluate something that's like a new technology, I'm really interested in like, is it changing user behavior in a fundamental way? And if it's not, then it's probably either a fad or some kind of hype machine that's just spinning away. Or, and if it is, then it's something that's meaningful, and it can be fuzzy, like because in the late 90s when the web was exploding, it was both. It was an incredibly speculative bubble, but there was also a lot of behavior that was changing. So it can be tricky. But I think, going back to what I was saying, like you got to keep your user hat on, and you got to and really ask the question, like, how does this change my life? How does this benefit me? And then as it pertains to gaming, like, if you don't play games, you probably can't answer that question. And if you can't answer that question, it's probably very hard to invest in those businesses because they may not be in your circle of competence. It's sort of like if you said, "Hey, Herman, what's the best pharmaceutical company to invest in?" And I'm like, "I don't know anything about pharmaceuticals, so I totally guessing." Or what do you think about that trial that failed with that company? I'm like, "I don't know anything about that." So I think, but you really gotta, I think it's important to exercise that discipline of like looking at, where the behaviors in people are changing as opposed to the customers, the users, not the speculators,
Absolutely. No, that was great. All right. Well, we've talked a lot. We have covered so many different things. I'm gonna have you back on to talk more about various aspects of the gaming industry. I mean, there's new stuff going on all the time, so definitely we'll have you back on to talk about some of these big news items as they come due. But to close us out here today, looking at 2023, you've alluded to a few things, but are there any other trends or things that we should understand when looking at the gaming industry or that you're looking at?
So to me, the thing that I think is, there's a few things that I think are interesting that are happening. Of course, VR and AR gaming is a really interesting area because VR has been sort of promised almost for decades. Like the first VR headsets were back in the late 90s and it died. So VR's died a few times. And it may die again, I don't know. But that's an area that's pretty interesting. Especially with like Sony's new VR2 glasses coming out soon. I'm pretty excited for some of those experiences. And of course, Facebook is willing to burn prodigious amounts of cash to do it. That's an interesting area. The other area that I think is very interesting is like, consoles were supposed to die a long time ago, and they have not died yet. And I think that's really surprising in some ways, but they haven't. And so will this console cycle continue? And this is especially, I think, valuable for like Nintendo people who follow Nintendo stock, because Nintendo sort of has this history of like they have these incredible IPs, but they're only on their own console. So once in a while they make a great console and they do really well. Once in a while they make a derpy console and then the stock falls off a cliff. And is their stock terminally in that state, or do they get out of that? That's interesting. And then, there's a lot of consolidation like the Microsoft deal and stuff. I think those are interesting. And then the last one is, there's a real interesting thing going on with the tools around content creation are getting unbelievably good. Like if you look at what people are doing with the Unreal Engine and the collaboration between NVIDIA and Epic, and a lot of game studios are abandoning their own game engines and just switching over to Unreal. And, there's the war between Unreal and Unity kind of going on. So it's getting a lot easier to make incredibly realistic, high resolution stuff, to the point where, like, I don't know if you've seen it, but like some of the stuff is like you can barely tell it's not real humans. So I think we're getting close to where you could have synthetic humans basically in video games and stuff. And I mean, that's just sort of a continuation of games becoming more realistic, but that's a pretty exciting area to watch too.
Very cool. All right. Well, Herman, with that, again, thank you for everything that you shared with us here today. Where can our audience go and find more information on you, follow you on social media, as well as your website?
The best place to find all that is just find me on Twitter, and it's at PETERSHK. That's my archaic Twitter handle from 2009. But you can search my name and it's pretty easy to find. But that's probably the best place.
And for everyone, that's Herman with 2 N's. Okay, at the end, just to make sure.
Yeah.
So Herman, thank you so much again, man. I really appreciate it. Good luck. Stay safe, and we'll definitely have you back on at some point this year for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not an offer or solicitation of an offer to buy or sell securities. SNN Network, SNN Inc., and the Planet MicroCap podcast and the representatives are not licensed brokers, broker-dealers, market makers, investment bankers, investment advisors, analysts, or underwriters. We do not recommend any companies discussed. We may buy and sell securities in any company mentioned and may profit in the event those securities rise in value. We recommend you consult with a professional investment advisor, broker, or legal counsel before purchasing or selling any securities referenced in this podcast.